James chapter 1, verses 26 to 27. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Over to Chris.
Let me add my welcome to Tom. It's really good to see you here. It's lunchtime. Thank you for joining us, for giving up time in a precious working day, and a particular welcome if this is your first time here. I know we've got a number here for the first time. Particular welcome to you. My name is Chris Fishlock, as Tom said. We've been carrying on through the book of James for the rest of the academic year, but this is the last of the installments in chapter 1. And we're looking just at those verses that Tom read out. It's probably worth just making a little introductory note before we get going. Now, James is concerned all the way through with how Christians live their life. And so I guess wherever you are on the sort of spectrum of understanding, from sort of committed, experienced believer in Christianity to interested observer, or perhaps even a little bit more of a skeptic, wherever you are, I hope today's passage will be useful in helping us to understand what real Christianity should look like and what drives it, because we all hate hypocrisy. Let me tell you about Axel. Axel was a 17-year-old Belgian teenager. This is a true story. Read it in the papers, must be true. She was a big football fan. And so in 2014, when Belgium made it to the World Cup, she went to Brazil with some friends to watch. During the game, the TV cameras homed in on her and her group, and a scout from the fashion cosmetics company L'Oreal saw her and liked her look. I don't know how, but they managed to find her and get in touch with her and contact her about the idea of representing L'Oreal. They said to her that she had the look that they were interested in, and she was offered a quite lucrative modeling contract. It's a sort of overnight discovery that you hear about sometimes, and it would have propelled her into fame and fortune. At least it did for a few days, until L'Oreal discovered some photographs on social media. Remember, this is 2014. They weren't as diligent as everyone is today, when it's one of the first things that happens today, isn't it? If you apply for a job, your social media accounts will be trawled. Anyway, back then, a few days later, 5 days, I guess it took, 5 days later, photographs of the teenager were spotted on social media. One in particular, she was posing with a hunting rifle behind a dead gazelle that she'd supposedly shot on a recent trip to Africa. Now, it turned out that the trip was completely legal. It was legit. She was with her father. It was done by license, etc., etc. But from L'Oreal's perspective, it was a complete disaster. You can't be a brand ambassador for a cosmetics company like L'Oreal and have a picture on social media that's associated with blood sports. It just doesn't work. And so the Belgian teenager went back to being a Belgian teenager. All fame and fortune was taken away. And this is the issue that James is trying to bring to bear on us. He wants us, his readers, to be single-minded, to be wholehearted. Remember, he's addressing Christians. So this isn't instruction on how to become a Christian. This is the plumb line for the Christian, for the person that claims to follow Christ. If you claim to follow Christ, are you leading a single-minded, a wholehearted life? One that is consistent with the values of being a Christian. And the point that James is going to develop through the rest of the book, everything matters. There's no sort of off time, no me time, no independent time. Everything counts. Your whole life should match up with what you believe. James has brought that to bear on us already, and he really goes quite deep in this final 2 verses. So, you claim to be a Christian. Let's make it personal now. You can go through this in your own minds. You claim to be a Christian. Well, if there was an independent audit conducted on you, on what your life actually looked like, what would they conclude? An independent auditor. Imagine the independent auditor. Okay, try to picture somebody, if that helps in your mind. Imagine they had 3 areas of your life that they were going to examine. These are the areas that come up that I'll explain in these few verses, but to put them into words that we understand easily, first Firstly, the words that come out of your mouth. Okay, that would be something that the independent auditor was interested in. Secondly, the way that you spend your time, particularly who you spend your time with. And then thirdly, this is quite an interesting one, examples of restraint in your life, where you've held back and not just gone with the flow of the world, particularly in speech, particularly in conduct, where you've held back and not just reflected the world. To be clear, this independent auditor, the one thing they would not do is come up and ask you your opinion about yourself. Okay, that doesn't count. What counts is what they see. Through your spoken words out generally to other people, through your conduct, through your areas of restraint. So would the way that you live your life, would it match up to what you claim you believe? There's the test. Remember, James is interested all the way through in challenging double-minded, inconsistent, hypocritical life. One of the most helpful commentators in the book of James, if you're interested in buying, we don't sell it here, we never make any money on books anyway, go onto Amazon and you'll find a good book by Daniel Durrani. He's still alive, very helpful modern-day commentator, quite useful if you're sort of reading it through in your sort of personal devotion, something like that. He has this helpful illustration about this section. I was once part of a large mission team project. Most of us stayed in the same house, so we were together many hours a day. One man rose first and early. We spotted him on the porch, reading his Bible at sunrise. One evening, he told me, I am excited to go to bed each night because I'm that much closer to my time alone with God in the morning. I can't tell you how close to God I feel. Well, Durrani comments, I felt like a spiritual dung beetle next to this lion of faith. Months later, our spiritual lion was in legal trouble for getting drunk and doing things that were both sins and crimes, he writes. Worse yet, he had been doing such things for years. Our spiritual giant was a giant hypocrite. And so the point again, a Christian should lead a single-minded life, believing something and then living consistently along those lines. Now, James, slightly unhelpfully in my opinion, but who am I to critique James? Slightly unhelpfully, he uses the word religious positively. And that's hard because if you're anything like me, as Christians, we tend to use the word religious quite negatively. So I've tried to sort of capture this by using the word pure or good religion or bad religion, because I always talk about Christianity being the opposite of religion. You probably heard me say that before. In fact, I think I might have even said it last week. Anyway, James uses it very positively. Good religion. He's talking about authentic Christianity when he talks about good religion. I hope that's clear. We certainly need to have that perspective as we read 26 and 27. So, here are the three tests that James applies. What we say, what we do, and where we hold restraint, what we don't say and do. The three tests that our friendly auditor, I'm sure that's an oxymoron, our friendly auditor, the three tests that our friendly auditor will bring to bear on your life. So the first one, what we say. Do you control your tongue? Have a look at verse 26, chapter 1, verse 26. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Now, this expression, to bridle the tongue, it's quite a bizarre expression, really, isn't it? But immediately, it helps us to see how serious this issue is. I did a little bit of research on bridle. It's not very hard to find out that a bridle is basically only ever used to control a horse. A certain article I read suggested that other very scary large animals like horses, sort of mules and donkeys, might also need a bridle, but basically large scary animals are controlled by bridles. And I say large and scary as in powerful and a mind of their own unless they're carefully controlled. And that's the point that James is making about the tongue. The tongue, like a horse, will need careful direction unless we want to get ourselves into trouble. And James emphasizes this by putting it in the present tense. This is an ongoing and continuously needed activity for the Christian to bring to bear on themselves. So what that means is it's not like any one of us, whatever stage of life we're at, however close to the end we may think we are, we're never going to get to the point where we can say, oh, I'm so mature now, I can just say the first thing that comes into my head. We will have to filter our thoughts carefully. We will have to bridle our tongue. And that means we're going to have to be careful and thoughtful in our speech. We may need to be quiet sometimes. Sometimes see this, don't you, in an older generation, can be more thoughtful and careful in what they say. And likewise with a younger generation, can just fire things off very quickly without thinking. One commentator puts it like this: if the doctor wants to know the state of your health, he says, let me see your tongue. And there is no better test of the health of the mind than to see what is on the tongue. When it gets furred up with unkind words and so much more, there is something very bad going on inside, in the heart. You can be sure of that, he concludes. Well, look at what James says, verse 26. This is where the thought gets developed a little bit further. Not bridling the tongue will deceive the heart. You see, the heart is the control center. That means the human mind and the understanding. We talk about heart as emotions. The Bible uses the word heart very much as the center of control for our body. And this is fascinating. What James is saying is what we say with our tongues will actually have a sort of reverse impact on us. It will begin to impact the way we think about things. The adage, I was doing some research yesterday after the Fleet Street talks because we had such a helpful conversation about this. And there is something, is that expression, isn't there, that, he's beginning to believe his own lies. He's told them so much. I was trying to find the origin of that, and I got sidetracked with something else and didn't find the origin. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if it isn't here. I mean, there's some truth in that. Once lies are said again and again, the person who ushers them will believe them. Say unkind things, you think unkind things. Say untrue things, and you start to have a distorted view of what's right and what's true. There's a self-perpetuating warning here. And so here is worthless or bad religion, and it's so close to every one of us. Your speech in the end will be a good indicator of what's going on in your heart, which I guess makes sense, doesn't it? The quality of what you believe will be seen to a certain extent in the words that come out of your mouth. So there's your first test. What you say really matters. And that will be something that the independent auditor is taking careful note of. What you do, secondly. What you do. James homes in on another test here. And you'll see that in that next verse. To visit orphans and widows in their affliction. Now, we have to be pretty careful when we're dealing with verses like this, statements like that one, especially when there's so much misunderstanding in the world and the wider church about the heart of true Christian activity. I think there's often an assumption you come across that when you come to sort of being involved in church activity, that you are necessarily involved with the more socially vulnerable of the world. But that's not the emphasis that the Bible gives, especially the New Testament. First and foremost, church activity, the association is with those who are spiritually needy. That's a wonderful sort of level playing field. That means that everyone comes on a very, very similar level playing field. See, when it comes to people we should be concerned about, we shouldn't be elevating those that are materially or perhaps socially able. And we shouldn't be elevating them above those that are materially vulnerable. There should be no distinction. And the interesting thing is, and we're going to be picking this up when we come back to James after in the new year. The interesting thing was, the congregations that James was writing to, they were doing exactly that. James develops this point on in chapter 2. They were giving preferential treatment to those that were materially well off. They were coming into their church meetings and they were sort of giving them the best seats. Oh, you sit here, you'll be comfortable. Less well-dressed people were sort of pushed to one side. They were making a distinction, and James says that's not church. It's not Christian activity. That's why he brings this statement in here. It introduces this whole subject. I read a very sad story about a wealthy woman who was found dead in her home. She'd lived alone, and the coroner found no organic reason for her death. There was no sense as to why she had died. In the end, the verdict that was given, I think the cause, the coroner wrote, I think the cause was neglect. She was weary of setting a single plate at the table and fixing her coffee cup once at a time. The old woman had written on her calendar only one phrase, "No one came today." So, I mean, again, let's bring this to bear on our own lives. In the context in which you live your life, this is where it counts. Don't worry about other people, it's for you. Are you living a life which serves you? Are you living a life which seeks to sort of socially climb for your benefit? Trying to sort of gather the right people around you. They're very helpful, very influential. We need to gather them in. That's what James is challenging here. That's not a Christian life. That is a very worldly life, of course. Lots of advantages for doing that sort of thing in worldly terms. That's not true religion. That's not Christianity. Are you prepared instead to get alongside those within your church family who aren't as able as you, who can't repay you, who may be a lot more difficult, the socially needy, the materially needy within your church family? Are those people that you can look after? So the second test, with whom have you spent your time? People you like? People who like you? People who can invite you back round, repay you? Third test. What you don't say and what you don't do. This is the area of restraint. Look at verse 27. You'll see it in that final phrase. It's perhaps one of the easiest phrases to understand in the section. And to keep oneself unstained from the world. It's pretty obvious what the restraint is there. Does your lifestyle, in other words, look different to the world? So easy just to go with the flow, isn't it? And I think especially as Christians, there are enough challenges sometimes as a Christian. We just want to sort of go with the flow in every area we possibly can. And James is just sort of saying, well, let's have a think about that. Phrase again, to keep oneself unstained from the world. James is impressing upon us the idea of sort of watching over ourselves. The original language of this phrase, to keep oneself, that's that first clause there, to keep oneself. It's to restrain ourselves in custody. That's the idea, sort of to lock ourselves up, so to speak. I mean, it's very easy, and it is on ourselves. We're very easy, aren't we, pointing the fingers and thinking, oh yeah, I can think of somebody this applies to. Yeah, James, this is always about us. It's always about yourself. It's the only person that matters in this instance. James is saying, don't go easy on yourself. Don't let yourself get stained by the world. Let me illustrate this. I started with a blood sports illustration. Here's another one I came across of the less legal kind, but it makes the point well, I think. There's an animal in Northern Europe that has a name that I can't pronounce, but I was told that it's very much like a stoat. Okay, and it has in winter a really, really beautiful white coat. Not surprisingly, poachers like to get their hands on these beautiful creatures. And these creatures are so proud of their white coats that they won't let anything stain them. To the point where the hunters have the poachers, I should say, have a very easy job in terms of getting hold of these things because they're protected. Very easy. All they've got to do is find where they live. They find their little home, often a sort of cleft of a rock or a sort of hollow of a tree, and they get a bit of grime, something sort of mucky and horrible, and they put it around the edge of where the stoat lives. And then they go out with a couple of dogs. The dogs sort of chase down the scent, and the stoat is then confronted with this dilemma. Go into its home and be covered in grime, or face the jaws of the dog. And every time they take the jaws of the dog, because they're refusing to allow themselves to get stained. I guess it makes the point, doesn't it? It's quite an extreme example, but you get the idea. And I think also that, maybe this is just me. This is how I've been thinking about it. I think I've become very happy to stain myself, quite frankly. This going with the flow, that the pressure just to go with the flow can be so huge sometimes. I'm very happy to take the hit with a little bit of grime here and there. And that's where the challenge comes. And so as Christians, here we are sort of operating in the city. We have the same jobs and we have the same drinking culture, perhaps. We have the same ambitions, and we slip in church on Sunday and we climb high up the career ladders and we laugh at the same jokes and we join in with the same gossip and we slip off to lunchtime talks and we spend our money on the same cars and the same holidays and same fancy houses. And there may not be anything wrong with any of that. We've dealt with some of these subjects already. James is not against money and wealth and success. James is against duplicity, double-mindedness. Where's your heart? What drives it? And here the challenge is, where the real sort of rub might be for us, are we in danger of just reflecting everything that the world does? It may actually be that what you don't say and what you choose not to do sometimes might be very, very important for you, for your own heart. That's not something I do. For your impact on how others think about the Christian faith too. These things are important. And so as all that information is sort of gathered in by our friendly independent auditor, what would they conclude about you? There's something to think about.